All right. I think we're close enough. I'm going to start with the housekeeping so that we can run on time. Welcome on everyone to our Wheat Wisdom Wednesday webinar. That's a good tongue
That's a
twister.
mouthful, isn't
Yeah, yeah.
it?
My name is Monica Jean. I'm a field crops educator for MSU Extension. I'm also happy to be on our Extension Wheat team. So I will be your host for tonight. We're going to allow it to be an open arena to ask questions. Dennis said you can even interrupt him. And I think I didn't even ask John, so I think it's fine with John too. Um, so you are welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions throughout the presentation. If you're having technological issues or you don't want to do that, you are welcome to either, I think you'd have to chat with the panelists, so you'd have to send something over the chat, or there's also the Q&A. I also want to point out, since we've allowed all of you to be able to talk, it kind of shifted the screen. So if you're looking at this and it looks funny at home, it's probably because of your viewing settings, and you would want to go to the top of the window and scroll over to view and then click side by side gallery or standard in order to get rid of like the speaker where you're looking at all of us. So you might have to play with those because we did kind of adjust those when we came in. So hopefully no one's having problems with that. But I just wanted to point that out. Otherwise, we are recording these and they will get posted later as I understand both the video on the Michigan Wheat website, and we also will be posting them to the My Field Crops Team podcast, MI Field Crops Team podcast. So you'll be able to get on later and watch it again if you didn't take good notes and you got to go look back at it. Otherwise, any other housekeeping I didn't think of? Dennis, Jody, John? No? Okay.
So,
Then I want to go ahead and introduce Jody. I think she's going to do your guys' kickoff. And please let me know if any questions in chat.
Great. Thank you, Monica. Just real quick, wanted to welcome all of you on behalf of the Michigan Wheat Program, which is your wheat checkoff program. We heard from a lot of you that it's just been some tough times, and you're asking those questions. What can you do when you're looking at that bottom line? How can you make some changes? What's the best bang for your buck? And I'm lucky enough to be part of the extension team, if you will. They adopted me with Monica, Jenna Failer, and Dennis Pennington. And we were just having a conversation of how do we get you these kinds of answers? And how do we get you the information and keep it interactive so you can figure out what's going to work best on your farm and your operation? And Dennis was so gracious, and I think he kind of signed you up too, John, to kind of work on this. And we are very excited. They have a couple of amazing spreadsheets pulled together. So I'm going to turn it over to Dennis Pennington and Jon LaPorte to walk you through and show you what you can do and how you can play with some of the numbers and make decisions for your farm. And then when it's done, I'm going to take you to our website, mywheat.org, and show you where you can go and get to these yourself and kind of play at home. So with that, Dennis and John, take it away.
all right. Thanks, Jody, and thanks, Monica. I'll get started here, but before I share my screen, we've already got a question in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and address this right now. The question is, what do you think of the idea of timely planting wheat on 15-inch row spacing and in the spring planting soybeans at 15-inch rows halfway between the wheat rows? Um, so there's been a number of growers that have tried that. That'd be called intercropping. It has been done successfully, although there's some things that you have to be careful of. One of them, the determining the timing of when to plant those soybeans is critical because you want them to be able to get started and not get shaded out by the wheat canopy, but yet you don't want to get started too early, and then you have the when you're clipping off the wheat or you're harvesting the wheat, you're not clipping off the growing point or the top of those soybean plants. So timing is a little bit of a challenge, and weather every year is going to play a role in that. How to determine that timing. A couple caveats when you go to 15-inch row spacing wheat. That's generally a lower yield potential than drilled wheat. And we're actually have some research data that shows that 5-inch row spacing wheat is even higher yielding than what a drill at 7.5 inches is. So you got to keep that in mind as far as yield on the soybeans. I think you can get a reasonable yield on the soybeans as long as they get a decent start. But that is one way of double cropping. But I guess if you got other questions about that, let me know. And I saw David Williams had his hand up. Do you
He
still want to
did.
talk,
Yeah,
Dave?
I put it down just in case it was a mistake, but I was gonna see if he needed us to.
Okay.
Okay, he has an ability to talk if he had a question there, David, but
I I'm okay.
okay.
I hit the wrong button.
No problem. Hi, David. Welcome.
Send me a bill.
Oh, okay. All right, will do. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started on the webinar tonight. Um, Typically, in the past, we've put together webinars that have been focused primarily on agronomic topics. And generally, we try to get some RUP credits where we can. It's getting more and more difficult to get approved for RUP credits. We almost have to talk about like pesticide application, safety, and things like that in order to even get these RUP credits anymore. But with what's going on, and like Jody said in the introduction there, the objective of this is to focus more on the economics. So tonight we are going to talk about how to get the most bang for your buck. And we've got a couple spreadsheets we'll share with you. The 2 weeks from today on January 21, Angie Setzer is going to talk about wheat marketing is essential in this climate. And then the final of the series here will be 2 weeks after that. Planting wheat makes sense for growers in the crop rotation. And that'll be Joanna Follings from the Ontario Ministry of Ag and myself. And all of these will be Wednesday evenings from 7 to 8 p.m. On these dates, January 6, 21, and then February 4th. So, with tight wheat margins, how do you get the most bang for your buck? Let's set the stage. The crop is planted now, so we can't do anything about variety selection or change seeding rate or planting date or starter fertilizer. Um, so that's kind of where we are. The crop is overwintering. And so I mean, as far as what can we do in the field, there's really not much. Most of it's been under snow cover for a good part of the winter here so far, although things are melting around here where I am. I'm not sure about where you are. So as we think about the overwintering timing, we want to make sure that crop scouting in the spring during at green up time is a pretty important thing to do. So I would be making plans now for doing that and try to get scout around. Try to scout all of your fields if you can. When you do go to scout your fields, you want to look at the plant stand. I would count some tillers per plant just to get an idea how much tiller capacity you have there. And really the idea is to determine the amount of growth because the more biomass you can produce, the higher your yield potential will be. So this is kind of step one as far as where we're going to head next. So as we move into the spring, you'll have some decisions to make. This is going to affect what your input costs are and your bottom line as far as how much, profitability your wheat crop will be. So with the prices where they are right now, we're going to have to make some careful selections and make sure they're agronomically sound. And first we'll start with nitrogen, and then we'll talk a little bit about herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, and then we'll wrap up with plant growth regulators, micronutrients, and biologicals. So let's go to step one here, spring crop assessment. To do these plant stand and tiller counts, what you want to do is you want to actually dig plants up. And there's instructions if you follow this website, and I'll try to post this in the chat box here so you can go to it. I want to go
I
to,
can get it, Dennis, if you want to.
okay, there's that. And then I'm going to bring up this actual website. So when you go to this website, evaluating wheat stands and spring management, there's some information up here at the top. There's a video you can watch on it just walks you through how to dig plants and what to look for and whatnot. So there's good information there. Looks like the video is posted twice there. But your scouting procedure, you want to measure 3 foot of row. You want to count and record the number of plants. And the key thing there is plants, not tillers. Um, and you want to calculate the average number of plants per foot. So if you're measuring 3 foot of row, you take your count, divide it by 3. And you want to do this in 3 to 5 locations throughout the field. And once you have your average number of plants per foot, then you can come down here and look at these different row spacings and determine what your percent of yield potential is. Are you at 100%? So if you're on 7.5 inch row spacing, you need between 15 and 18 plants per foot of row, and you are at 100% of your yield potential. If you're less than 15, you have anywhere from 11 to 14, you're at 90 to 95%. And then as your numbers go down, you can see how to read this chart. So this is something that I would use to make sure, so you have an idea of where you are. If you're down here in this 90 to 95 or even 75 to 80%, that should make an impact on how you decide how much nitrogen to put on and if you can afford to pay for some of these other crop inputs. Because if you're already at a lower yield potential, you got to factor that in. And I see a question from Bob. What would be the plants per foot of row on 15 inches? I'd have to do that math. I'm not 100% sure. But I will follow up with you, Bob, on that. Okay, any questions about scouting? The other thing is, so when you're measuring the 3 foot of row, I would actually dig those plants right out of the ground and separate them. Don't try to just put a tape measure on the ground and get on your hands and knees and try to count individual plants. It's really hard to count that way. So make sure you're getting a good accurate count. You dig the plants up, you can separate them, and then you can get an actual count. But also count the number of tillers. That'd be another good thing to keep track of, because if you have a low number of tillers, you may want to try to get out a little bit earlier with some of your nitrogen. If you have 3 or 4 tillers or more, you can delay that nitrogen to Feeks 5. So any questions about this before I move on? I'm not seeing anything come in, I guess. Okay, so step 2, nitrogen. We got some things to decide here on nitrogen, and that's coming up here fairly soon in the spring. First thing we need to talk about is your yield goal. It needs to be realistic, and it should be based on actual farm yields. This is probably not a year when you want to go out there and say, well, I'm going to shoot for a 30 bushel increase in yield, because you might be able to get it possibly, but in a year when you're not sure, and the prices are where they are as far as nitrogen and then the wheat price, you want to use a realistic goal. And so if your average farm yield is at 90, then that should be your yield goal. I understand if you want to try to push to get toward 100, but just you might want to run a few scenarios. And when we pull up the spreadsheet, you'll see how to do that. So once you've determined your yield goal, then you can determine how much total nitrogen to apply. And this comes from the tri-state fertilizer recommendations between Purdue, Ohio State, Michigan State University. So Kurt Steinke was involved in putting these formulas together. So the formula is 1.33 times your yield goal. You do this math first because it's in parentheses, then you subtract 13. So for example, if your yield goal is 90, you take 1.33 times 90 and then subtract 13 from that number, and that is 106.7. So a yield goal of 90, you want to put 106.7 pounds of total nitrogen on. So we need to think about fall. You probably put some on in your starter. Like if you use MAP or DAP in the starter, there's some nitrogen in it. And generally, a lot of guys end up putting on, anywhere 15 to 30 pounds of actual nitrogen in the fall, just because they're trying to get their phosphorus on, and they get that. So let's say in this example, you got 20 pounds in the fall. So to determine how much spring nitrogen, you take your total nitrogen which is 106.7, subtract the fall nitrogen, which is the 20, and then you end up with 86.7. That should be your target for spring nitrogen application. Okay, so that's the rate. So now, should you do splits? Well, a lot of the research that Kurt has done here at MSU shows that it's like maybe a 1 in 10 benefit, economic benefit of splitting applications at average yields. Now, if you're a grower that's pushing up to 110, 120 bushel yield, splitting the application would be a wise investment. That ensures that you have that nitrogen available to that crop a little bit later on. By the time you reach flowering, 75% of the nitrogen is taken up by the crop. And then from flowering to physiological maturity or the end of the grain fill period, you still have 25% of that nitrogen taken up. So splitting sometimes allows you to make sure that you don't run out of nitrogen before that grain fill period has completed. But if your target like here at 90 in this example, I would probably put it on and all on in one pass. Some growers have used some of the inhibitors, urease inhibitors and whatnot. They add some costs. They do their job. So you're gambling on what kind of weather conditions you think you're going to have, and how much loss you're going to have. So you got to kind of think about what's the cost of the inhibitor compared to what the benefit might be. And in all these decisions, you have to consider the cost versus the benefit. So timing. I see more and more people putting out freeze-up applications of nitrogen. It's too early. I mean, unless you have a really heavy soil that it prevents you from making timely applications because you'll cut the field up by putting your nitrogen on, don't do freeze-up applications. If you're going to do a single pass, you want to put all your nitrogen on about Feeks 5. That's prior to stem elongation. Stem elongation is the beginning of the rapid nitrogen uptake phase. So you want to get that nitrogen out there early enough so that it's available to the plant during that rapid growth stage or growth phase. If you're going to do a two-pass system, this 60% is just a general guideline. You can alter that. And I have some people that are putting on 40% up front and then followed by 60%. But generally, you want to get some nitrogen on up front and then kind of top it off later in the second pass. And you want to do that by Feeks 7. So when you're starting to see that second node, that's the timing that you need to get that second shot on. So I'm spending a lot of time here on nitrogen because this is one of the biggest expenses and most important things as far as costs that you're going to have. So we want to balance nitrogen loss with grain yield. So on the x-axis here, we've got nitrogen rates. These go from 0 all the way up to 320. This is kilograms per hectare, but basically low to high nitrogen. And then you got your grain yield on the y-axis going from low to high. And here's your response. As nitrogen rates increase, so does yield to a point where it plateaus. So your target needs to be somewhere, on the early side of the curve, because on this axis, this is nitrogen recovery efficiency. And you can see that at the low nitrogen rates, down here at 40, it's got a very high nitrogen recovery efficiency. You don't want to put a bunch of nitrogen out there and just lose it. So as that nitrogen rate increases, the recovery efficiency decreases. So you're going to want to target somewhere in this area. And then again, make sure your yield goal is realistic. You use good judgment, and that's the formula for the nitrogen. This is a little bit of data from the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network. This is on the x-axis here is grain yield, and it goes from 40 up to 180 bushel yield. And then the nitrogen rate is on the x-axis here. It goes from 0 up to, close to 250. So you can see the range in the values here and the trend. So as you increase nitrogen, you generally increase grain yield. But one important thing to look, that box highlights everybody that had nitrogen uptake of 150 pounds or more. But look at the range in yield. This particular farm here had a yield just a little bit above 100, and you got growers out here that are yielding up in that 170 range. So that's a huge range in yield, and they're still taking up the same amount of nitrogen, or above 150. And so the nitrogen use efficiency is going to be much higher for these high yield guys. So if you don't think you can get out here to these higher yields, maybe you need to back off a little bit on your nitrogen. But even with some of our higher yield growers, there's a wide range in the nitrogen uptake. So the next part of these is step 3 through 7, these crop protection inputs. I want to go through those once we get into the spreadsheet. And herbicide, you want to base that on scouting and shop around because you can find places that have lower price products. Fungicide, you want to base that on scouting. I know a lot of growers have, kind of their set program that they like to run. But based on what varieties you have out there and what diseases are present, maybe you can skip an early application in a year when the prices are depressed, and then use generics anywhere you can because you can save money on those generics. When you get to flowering fungicide, that's another story. You need to use, there's about 3 products, I guess, maybe, 3 products that you can use at flowering. Insecticide, people put that in because they call it cheap insurance and they don't want to have to make another pass if armyworm comes in 2 weeks or whatever. But it really should be based on scouting. Plant growth regulators. I would only recommend plant growth regulator if you have really high yield potential, or you've had manure application, or something happened and you got a field that got double applied with nitrogen. That I talked to a grower that happened. They had the co-op came out and they had 2 applicators putting nitrogen on, and both of them put nitrogen on the same field at the same rate, so they got doubled up. So that's where those would be scenarios where a plant growth regulator would be beneficial. A plant growth regulator will never increase your yield. All it does is help with harvest, so that when you do harvest, you're able to collect all of the grain, and so hopefully it's not laying on the ground. Micronutrients, foliar, biological, and other things, you've really got to look at your cost versus benefit. If you're trying new things to push yield, this might be the year when you kind of pull back and say, let's just operate at normal mode here rather than trying to push it a lot higher.
Hey, Dennis, you got a couple.
Yep, I see that. How about one pass with N and voted in?
Coded in.
Coded in. Got it. Yeah, so the coated N, what that would do is that would delay the release of it in the soil. So the timing on that one, you'd want to make sure that you're putting that on at that Feeks 5. If you don't want to put coated N on at Feeks 7, because that might delay the availability, and you don't want to starve your wheat crop for nitrogen early on or during that rapid uptake phase once jointing starts. Gordon, is PSNT showing any benefit before a second N application in wheat? That's a really good question, and I wish I could tell you yes. However, the timing of when we're putting this on, these applications are going on in April. The soil is just warming up, microbial activity is just starting to happen, and mineralization is just starting to happen. And so PSNTs are going to be so variable, it's going to be really hard to use that on a consistent basis to really get a good answer. So yeah, I guess that's about the best I can do for you on that. David, what if you're baling straw and growth regulators? Yep, I get that question quite a bit. A plant growth regulator is intended to shorten the stem. So in terms of the length of the stalks, yes, they should be shorter, but only by a couple inches. But what they also do is they thicken that stem. So if you're selling straw by the bale, yes, this might impact you, but I don't know anybody that's selling straw by the bale. They almost all sell it by per pound. So you take a semi load across a scale and you get paid on tons based on what it weighs. So what we've seen basically is the plant growth regulators, it does shorten it, but it does not reduce your tonnage yield of straw from the crop. So uh, that's that that's one thing to consider if you're selling straw off. So a plant growth regulator should not hurt you in terms of straw yield. Okay. Any other questions? I guess not.
That was it.
Okay, so I've done kind of some introduction. We're going to start to bring economics into some of these agronomic decisions, but first, I'd like to introduce Jon LaPorte. He's going to talk about a couple things here, economics related, marketing related, before we bring up the spreadsheet. So, Jon?
Thanks, Dennis. And we're not going to try to steal any of Angie's thunder for the next segment here in 2 weeks. So we just wanted to. One of the things Dennis and I talked about is when you're looking at this spreadsheet, and you're thinking about the economics involved in and from start to finish for the wheat crop. That market price is part of that spreadsheet, and so we want to at least have a little bit of a kind of a little preemptive conversation about where markets are at and thinking about what price you maybe want to plug into the spreadsheet as you're kind of playing around with it. You're going to get a whole bunch of great information from Angie in 2 weeks. So really what we wanted to kind of focus on here is just kind of setting the stage for where our markets right now and what kind of some of the things we can take away as we're starting to play around with this spreadsheet. The first thing here on the left we've got here is the U.S. agriculture baseline projections from USDA. They release these things every year. They do kind of a first update in November. The final update really will be next month in February. But as you can see, as you've experienced out there, prices have been coming down. They're projecting the 2025, 2026 crop. So what we've already harvested, maybe you've already sold it, maybe you still got it in the bin or at least part of it in the bin. They're expecting that to be about $5 per bushel on average for the whole marketing year. We start to see a little bit of an improvement in the expectations going into the 2026. So what you've got in the field right now, they're expecting in the long term that the market's going to average $5.40. But if you look over on the left, where we kind of see where some of these prices are as we look out to this coming July, we're kind of a far cry from this average that they've kind of projected. And with USDA's projection, it's kind of this idea of if nothing else changes, this kind of as is situation. Well, in the last month, 2 months, we've had quite a bit of stuff go on in the markets. We're continuing to still figure out where things are at in terms of a lot of factors that impact supply and demand, and that's something you're going to hear a lot more from Angie. But here we wanted to just showcase that there's a wide disparity in prices depending where you're at in the state. So I took these numbers on Monday. Futures is actually still about the same as what it was on Monday. I looked earlier today, about $5.33. Basis, though, is really wide, kind of all over the place across the state. We've got an average of about 50 cents um, below the futures, but you can see that minimum or that weakest where it's at its widest, we're pushing $1 at 95 cents in some place in the state, but we get a little bit stronger in other areas where it's about 35 cents. And so the big thing to think about is where you're looking at potential markets, what kind of indicators are, is there a strong demand for that local market where you're at? Do you want to maybe look at putting in a little bit higher price than maybe what you're seeing in some places because you're looking at that local market? You can see the example of the kind of the range of the cash price where we're looking anywhere from $4.38 upwards of $4.98 with that average of $4.75. And just for comparison's sake, when you look back just at this past July, we're looking at an average price of $5.25. So the average today versus the average in July is 50 cents lower. So most people are kind of watching, they know that the prices are down, but that gives you a feel for we're talking at least 50 cents below where we were. And so what you do on the input side is really, really important because you're not going to have necessarily the higher price in crop, or at least I don't know. That's the kind of thing I'm hoping Angie's going to give us some good tips on what to expect here in the outlook here for wheat in the next 6 to 8 months. But just to know that because of what the picture looks like today and what we've kind of experienced here in the past 6, 7 months, we definitely want to focus on these inputs. Dennis, you want to go to the next slide? One of the things Dennis and I also talked about, we wanted to highlight was that just to give some people some food for thought on some of the tools that are out there. Um, and I know this is one of the things you're going to hear a little bit more in detail in 2 weeks, but want to just preface that if you're looking at marketing wheat and you don't have storage, you do have options besides just a spot sale. Forward contract is one option where you could go ahead and set the price as early as today if you'd wanted to go to the local elevator and do that for when you're going to probably sell that, whether it's July, August time period. And basically, what you're doing is you're going to lock in that price. You're going to lock in the basis in the future and just go ahead and set whatever that value of that crop is. You also can use a basis contract. You got to kind of watch the timing on these, but that allows you that if you think the basis at your local market's really good, you can lock that in and then kind of see where the futures prices go and hopefully get a little bit better than maybe the cash price we're looking at today. USDA's forecasting 540 for an average, so that's something that might be an option to think about. The other thing that we looked into was what is this idea of delayed pricing and storing at commercial storage? And essentially what you do there is you deliver the grain, you're going to pay storage, and then you're going to set that cash price at a later date. One of the nice things we found with that talking to elevators that a lot of Michigan elevators offer free delayed pricing up to August 31st. The thing to watch is once you get past August 31st, all those charges kick in and it's retroactive back to when you actually delivered the grain. But if you don't have storage, and that's sometimes a problem for people with wheat, is they like to kind of keep those storage bins for corn and soybeans or some other crop, you do have options if you're not looking to store your wheat. Dennis, you go to the next slide. For those that actually do have storage, you've got a few more options to play with. Um, Forward contracts, delayed pricing. Of course, if you've got storage, just sticking it in the bin and waiting till you see a price you like is certainly an option. It is a tool. You can also use basis contracts, but then you've also got some options of a hedge to arrive where it's like a basis contract, except you're setting the futures price versus the basis and hoping that basis is going to get a little bit stronger as you get closer to that delivery period you're looking at. And then there are a number of what we call minimum price type contracts where essentially you try to set some kind of floor with a potential to move upwards. Different elevators have different options, but if you've got storage, you've got a little bit more tools to play with. And these are important as you think about as we start to move to that spreadsheet, what kind of price do I want to forecast out? Where do I think I'm going to be able to kind of set the value of this crop? Knowing what we know at this point, you start to play around plugging your own numbers in. Do we think we can gain a little bit better? Do we think that we're just going to stick with what the price is today? Depending on how you market or how you're thinking about market, you want to plug that into the spreadsheet that Dennis and I are going to show you here. And so these are just some kind of quick little highlights for people to kind of show that you do have some options to think about. In 2 weeks, I know when Angie comes in, she'll have some input on which of these tools maybe are really beneficial based on what's going on in the market and the outlook in the market. So kind of keep some of these things in mind. There's some good questions to maybe ask as you're hearing about what's going on in the wheat market, and maybe one's going to be more of an advantage over another. Really good food for thought going into the next segment in 2 weeks. Dennis, if you want now, I think we're at a point that we can go ahead and bring those spreadsheets up. And so I'm going to kind of walk us through just the kind of how the base setup of this is, and then Dennis and I are going to kind of work together walking through some of the things we've got input. Over on the left, we were just talking about price. You start off on this tool really with anything you see that is in blue is actually an area that you can change the information. And so we made sure we put in here in this example, we've got our wheat price, we've got our an estimated wheat yield, about 90 bushels. Um, we also threw in a price for straw if we want to think about, are we going to sell some straws, as Dennis was talking about earlier? And that'll give you kind of a projected total gross revenue. As you scroll down, we've got some numbers in here where we've got a kind of an example range that we pulled from the FinBin database. This is a database that's housed by the University of Minnesota at the Center for Farm Financial Management. Michigan actually participates in the data that goes into this database. And so we looked at a 5-year average of the wheat information that was in there to kind of give us an idea of what's been that range to look at where prices could go. And then what we input was kind of some base numbers, pretty much from the crop insurance down through the operating interest here in the direct expenses, and then also a little bit in the overhead expenses for farm insurance and land rent, and then interest, more of the term interest for like mortgages and things like that. So these are just some base numbers. They're not really indicative of, we think these are going to be the prices for wheat for 2026. It's kind of a moving target, but this is kind of a good starting point, we think, for where to think about in terms of where some of these prices may fall. And then here at the bottom on the left, we've also got some break-even numbers. So you can kind of get an idea of, what is that price we have to have in order to, if we're going to have the yield that we're getting based on our expenses, what's that price we've got to have to net out a zero. And if we're looking at, what price or what yield we'd have to have if we think about the fact that maybe we're going to set a price based on our expenses, what's that break-even yield we're going to have to achieve? And so this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of, are we doing better than what we expect? Do we need to maybe go back in and retool some of the numbers? But just a little bit to give you an idea of where you're at in terms of the target, in terms of yield goal, as Dennis was talking about earlier, but then also to think about that price you're going to receive and that overall gross revenue. Dennis, you want to scroll up a little bit? So you notice for seed, fertilizer, and chemicals, those are not in blue. Those are actually blacked out, because over in the right, what we put together was kind of an area where you can kind of plug and play and start to do a little bit more detail and think about how some of these items, these steps that Dennis was going through, how those production practices, production decisions ultimately impact the economics of your wheat crop. Dennis, you want to go ahead and walk them through some of these base numbers? You're muted, Dennis.
Sorry, I had my mute on. So one thing I wanted to point out is these bars right here are representative of like a percentage of the cost, or the bigger the bar, the bigger the cost. And the reason why I spent a lot of time on fertilizer earlier, or nitrogen, is because fertilizer is the biggest share of the direct or variable costs for growing wheat. So the fertilizer is one of the areas where we need to focus and make sure we're doing a good job and not over applying nutrients. So we have a place up here where you can change, if it's costing you, $26 a bag for seed, you can change that here. And then that'll update this price down here. But this is something that's already, it's the crop is in the ground. So for now, we're kind of beyond this stage. So we'll leave it. And we have it in here at 1.4 million seeds per acre, and the seeds per pound at 15,000. That's just kind of a ballpark, average from year to year. But it depends on the variety, depends on the year. So that puts you at a seed cost at $35. So now down here under the fertilizer calculator area, we have a list of products. And then I've plugged in prices from a survey that was done through USDA and a group in Ontario. And we got average prices in the US, average prices in Michigan and Ontario for each of these products. So then over here, you can just plug in whatever rate you want. And then down below here, you'll get what your actual amount of each, the NPK and S, which those are kind of the key products to that you want to, or key nutrients to apply. So in this scenario that I've got here, I've got spring nitrogen at 8. There was 8 pounds of fall nitrogen, 39 pounds of P applied, 105 of K, and 20 of sulfur. So if we think about our yield goal over here at 90, remember I said a 90 bushel yield goal should net 106.7 pounds of total nitrogen. So if you add these two up, they add up to the 100 and like rounds to 107. So, the phosphorus numbers, you can, it depend on soil test levels. We put on 75 pounds of MAP. So that would have been a fall application. But, and then depending on what your potash numbers are, you could probably back that down to, 100 if you're not taking straw off, or maybe even 75 pounds, depending on what your soil test levels are. And when you make this change, it makes the change in here and it affects your bottom line here. Okay. So this one down here is the one that's the most important because right now, the way I have it built, we're set up for a $19 an acre loss. So when I think about this, I guess for me, the first decision really is, do I want to sell straw or not? And some of you do, and some of you don't. I'm not exactly sure what straw price really is. I just plugged in $80, but this in the spreadsheet, you could plug in if you're selling it for 90, or 70 dollars or whatever it is, then just put in tons per acre that you're planning on getting for income from this. So, and then, if you sell $70 at 1 ton an acre is going to give you $70 more of income. Now your bottom line is a net of $51 an acre.
Dennis, on that, when you're putting in straw, remember as you're thinking about how many tons you're going to have, because Dennis had kind of lowered some of that phosphorus that he had originally, because originally wasn't showing that he was going to sell any straw. You're going to
Yeah.
want to make sure you're accounting for how much is going to be removed by that straw and
Yeah.
thinking about how that's going to impact your overall nutrient plan. Because if you were to add that back in, say, 175,
Yep.
we
I
suddenly
would
have an increase in price. What's that do to our bottom line at this point?
cut it back from 51 to $32 an acre. Yep. But that's real because if you're taking straw off, the in the straw it has the most amount of potassium in the straw compared to NPK and sulfur. So and a ton of straw can remove probably in the neighborhood of 70 pounds of potassium per acre or K2O. So you got to make sure. So that's why I bumped that back up to that 175 to make sure we're getting enough potassium out there in the field to do it. But the good thing about this is you can adjust all of these things. So,
Got some questions coming in, but
oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at the
okay.
questions. Yep. All right, where does transportation and fuel costs go? The the straw. So yeah, so if you're taking straw and you've got transportation and fuel, you'd want to add that in right here. So as fuel and freight and trucking would be the other one. So you'd have to kind of figure out, what your cost either per semi load or something, and divide that out on your yield per acre of straw, to get an idea of what that freight and trucking cost is. Um, So yeah,
And and in addition to that, it also depends how you're setting your price on that. Because if you're talking about where you're adjusting the price based on that, and you're actually calculating that into the actual straw price, you could put it there as well. It's shows up better if you're doing it the way Dennis is talking about, where you show it in the fuel and the actual freight and trucking. But you could adjust the price of straw based on whether you're charging more or less based on how you actually incorporate that in. So, because I know for some people, if they're delivering and it's a delivered price, you've got one of two ways you can put that in there. As long as you know when you're putting the price in there, that's the as delivered price adjusted for those. From the economic standpoint, from the financial standpoint, I'm always one big about tracking my movements, my numbers. I would recommend to do it the way Dennis is showing, but I do know some people do it the other way, so I want to mention that.
There's also a question, how do I calculate equipment costs for my spreadsheet, i.e. combine, tractor, etc.?
So if you're thinking about a case of where if it's something you own, one of the things we didn't put in here was things like a depreciation cost, which gets into a little bit higher level economics in terms of repaying the wear and tear on equipment. Um, the if you scroll down though, Dennis, you could put that in as an other category if you're thinking about those kind of costs on the equipment. If you're talking about fuel and repairs for just the general upkeep of the equipment, that could go up in the actual repairs, fuel, those type of areas, because that's where a lot of those actual costs typically end up anyway. If you're looking to just include an easy number, because there's a lot of cases for people they don't know what to put for, I'm not looking at my own history, or I'm trying to say I think things are going to be more expensive, or I just need a good number to start with. One of the other things we suggest people use as a starting point is maybe looking at some custom work rate numbers.
And
Because
I just posted those into the chat because I can read John's mind.
um, and that's always a good place to start, because if you don't know inherently what number to use, and you just want to be able to plug a number that seems reasonable, you can use those as a starting point, and then you can, based on the information that's in those custom work rate reports, you can decide whether or not you think, yeah, my equipment's a little bit better than that, or maybe a little bit worse off than that. You can adjust the numbers, and you can use those in here to placeholders for some of the things you're just not sure of.
Does MSU Extension have any tools to calculate depreciation costs for equipment?
We do have some other spreadsheets that include those if you want to do a deeper dive into something like this, where you're looking at a full-on budget for the year, where you really want to do a more extensive look on chemical, fertilizer, and then also in terms of some of the economic costs. We do have what we call our crop budget estimator tools, that there's a little bit more detailed version of those that do have those in there. But we don't really have anything standalone that I'm aware of. We do have, if you're trying to calculate a custom work rate for yourself, using your own information to try to give you an idea of where that's at. We do have a spreadsheet found actually in the same place, same website. Initially, you get to the custom work rate reports. You can actually calculate your own number in terms of those overall costs. So that, in lieu of an actual depreciation calculator, that might get you there.
okay.
And then Dennis, you got a high.
Oh,
So
hello.
that was the last one. There you
All
go.
right, so let's get back to the spreadsheet. We've talked a little bit about fertilizer application. Let's keep on going down here. The chemical calculator. There's a place to list products, the package price, the what unit you're going to apply per acre, and then the applied rate. And once you plug in the applied rate, that's what gives you your cost per acre. In this column, I just plugged in. I know that Husky is your full rate labeled rate for Husky is 13 ounces. Osprey's 4.75 ounces. So if you scout and you said, I really don't have any weed problem, you just put zero rate. And that just pulled whatever that number was here, out of your expenses, and that'll affect your bottom line down here. So this is where scouting and determining in what weeds you have out there. If you got grass problems, you probably are going to need the Osprey, because or a similar product to Osprey, to take out those grass weeds in your crop. So, and then, you can plug in whatever, herbicide you use here. You just enter the package price, and then whether, are you putting it on pints per acre, ounces, gallons, quarts, and then you just plug in your target rate, and then it'll calculate the cost per acre. Okay, so this is
And
designed kind of to be, um, build it however you're using it. Then down here, these are the additives that you would put in the tank with any of these products: AMS, crop oil concentrate, drift spreader, methylated seed oil. And I plugged in a drift agent. It costs us $29.60 per gallon. We're put it on at 1 ounce per acre, so that gives you 23 cents an acre for that product.
Dennis, I want to highlight real quick just for folks that you had clicked on the unit per acre for apply. If you want to click on that again, you showed where the different options were for the ounces, pints, and so
Oh,
forth. Any of those. I wanted to highlight that real quick because one of the things that Dennis and I worked on for this was we want to try to make this as straightforward for everybody as possible, that you get that price for what that package price is, but be able to go look at that label and say, what is that application rate? Click the rate that you're going to use, whether it's going to be in ounces, pints, quarts, and that way you don't have to try to do the math on that. We actually built behind the scenes the math to do that for you. So you just need to know the price of that product, what rate of application you're going to use, and then that rate, as Dennis is kind of showing you here. So I wanted to highlight that's a functionality of the tool we built in that should make it a little easier for you to plug and play on this.
okay. And then down below here is where we have the fungicide products, and I have three of them listed here. And I've got the prices listed, but you can see I have zeros in here. So right now in this plan where I'm at $32 an acre profit, I have made no fungicide application at all. So what so this is kind of how we built this worksheet. There's probably things that we could add to it. There was a question about where can you get it, and Jody uh, replied to the chat. It's available on the miwheat.org website, and she will show you that at the end of the meeting here. But what I wanted to do next, maybe, can I switch over to the other spreadsheet? Is that okay, John?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. I'm going to go to here, and I'll make that a little bigger so we can see it. All right, so here we've gone with a little bit higher yield, and so we've made some changes here. We got an $80 straw price, 1.25 tons per acre being sold off. We still have a $4.50 wheat price, but now we've got a yield goal set at 120. So based on 120, we need to apply about 146.8 or 146.7 pounds of total nitrogen. So we're doing that through 42 gallons of 28%. We're putting on 7 gallons of ammonium thiosulfate to get some sulfur. So note we got 20 pounds of sulfur here. And then we put on 115 pounds of MAP in the fall, and 175 pounds of potash in the fall. And we're doing that at that rate because we're taking straw off here. And maybe that number needs to be a little higher. I'm not 100% sure. But so you can play around with some of these numbers. And if you most of the application of nitrogen to wheat is the liquid products. But we do have a number of growers that are putting the dry products on. If you're putting dry products on, make sure the spreader you're using will spread uniformly across your field so you don't get that striping, or you can see like where higher nitrogen rate was dumped right behind the spreader. If you're trying to get good yields, that's just one way you're concentrating your nitrogen in strips and then not getting enough in between the strips. So, from that perspective, if you're making it with a sprayer, you can control that distribution a whole lot better. It's not that these liquid products are better than the dry products. It's just that you got to make sure you get them spread uniformly. So, and one thing you could do if you wanted to do like a cost comparison here, let's say instead of 28%, we want to use urea. Well, let's just zero out here. And now let's go down to urea. And I've got to put on another 13,146. I got to do some math here a minute. I said 147 subtract 13 equals that, divided by 0.46 equals 291. Okay, so that got me a little bit higher. I gotta back that off a little bit. Must have done something wrong. Let's go to that. Okay, I'm getting closer here.
That's
In
what you in the
fact,
ballpark. Yeah.
yep. So, and I should have kept track. So total fertilizer cost here is $181. Now let me put it back. Compared to 196.
About
So
a $15 difference per acre.
yeah, so the dry is a little bit cheaper. So that is one thing to consider. But make sure that you can, get uniform application across the area. So, and then in this example, I also put on a 13-ounce application of Husky tank mixed with 4.7 pounds, 4.75 ounces of Osprey. I added the drift agent, and then I plugged in a fungicide application, Miravis Ace, 13.7 ounces. That would be the flowering timing. Um, and I also added a generic tilt at $120 per unit, and putting on 4 ounces. So that added another 375. So this would be a T1 fungicide application. This would be a T3. And so that kind of just shows you where you are. And then we got to add MSO with both of those applications. So with the Miravis, we need MSO, and then with the tilt, we need MSO. So that's what this is down here. It adds $1.60 per pass to it. So now we're at a net of $100.23 per acre based on a 120 bushel and a 450 price, and selling 1.25 tons of wheat at $80. So you can play around with this too. Suppose you can market at $4.60. Um, that changed that number. That went up. Or suppose you don't want to sell straw. I would come in here and back down on here. I'm gonna back it down to 100 pounds of potash. And then you can see where your R seed. So by not selling straw, that cut that bottom line down quite a lot. So the straw is adding quite a bit of revenue here. Um, or I could put this back to 450 and see what it is here. Yeah, you're down to $24 or $25 profit per acre. So the idea behind here is for you to kind of use this as a tool to say, okay, what expenses can I afford to apply and make to my winter wheat crop? So does anybody have any more questions about this or how to use this tool? I'm looking over here. Looks like there's nothing in the chat, and I don't see anything in the Q&A right now.
Nope, it's all good.
Okay. So maybe what I'll do, I'll stop sharing my screen at this point. And Jody, you want to share your screen and show them where to go to find these spreadsheets?
Absolutely. One of the things, and I know we all have websites, right? And we all get a little tired of being sent to everybody's website, but that's what I'm going to send you because it has all this great stuff on it. So, Dennis, am I up? Am I
Yes.
ready?
Yep, you're up.
Perfect. So if you just go to miwheat.org, this is our website, and this stuff is on the front page. We make it easy to find, easy to locate. You're just going to scroll down and you're going to get to action needed. You also should have been here when you were over here and you signed up for the webinars. Also, you saw before we started, it's time to sign up for the Great Lakes Crop Summit. You can click to all these registrations from our website. It's also time to sign up for the Great Lakes Yen, and registration is open for our Michigan Wheat Program annual winter meeting. So all of that information is going to be there to sign up. And then if you're looking for the spreadsheets, you just scroll down like I did under grower resources, and it's right here. All you have to do is click on the production worksheet, or if you're looking at high yield, they were wonderful to make some tweaks and changes when we're looking at the high yield. So you can go ahead and click on that spreadsheet and you're going to be set and ready to go. As was mentioned, we are also taping this. So this right here will be changed and it will also have the webinars that we're doing. So all you'll have to do is click. Just click and you can go to the webinars. All of that is available off our homepage, miwheat.org. So there's a lot of resources out there that are available, and we just want to make sure you know where to go and to get those, how to sign up for more webinars, and how to get to these spreadsheets so that you can use these on your own farm. A lot of energy and work went into these, and I think they are really going to help out, especially in this time. So, Dennis, I don't know if you or John have more to add.
I would say just you know the and these things are always I consider these always a work in progress because you build them and you know there's always tweaks to be made and if anybody ever has input on things they'd like to see added or additional features, let us know because we may have another tool that does what you're looking for. But if it's something we can add into this that you think would be helpful, let us know on that too because more than happy to help do that.
So, John, one of the questions in the Q&A is how can we add items that are not in the sheets?
Yep.
Um, so, what are your thoughts? Like here, I just right clicked and said insert a row, and then they could type in, um, expense whatever or whatever it is, um, and then they could plug in a number here, say $8 an acre.
Yep.
Um, but does that become part of the total here?
Yeah, it does. As long as you make sure it's the way that the formula is written there, as long as you do it not below that interest line and not above the seed line, it
Yeah.
should capture, or really above any of those, should capture into that total there. So as long as you kind of do it in the middle of that range, you
Yep.
should be fine. Uh, just be sure when you're doing that, understand if you do an entire row, it might move some things over on the right, but you can always play around with Excel and just shift a
Yep.
little bit of the page if you want to. So yeah, feel free to add stuff in, make it a little bit more detailed for your farm. Uh, I don't know that these are locked, so you can when you download them, you can edit those, change some of the description in there. If you see an expense you don't have there, like for someone that doesn't have storage, you could change storage to something else. Um,
There's a question about manure costs too. Was that included in a specific place or would that just be an addition in?
that would be an addition, and we didn't get into manure. That we do have some tools that do account for manure. There's a whole set of calculations you're supposed to use to account for manure, in terms of how much is available now versus maybe a year from now. Um, our environmental educator, Sarah Zeiler, would be a great expert to talk to on that. She helped me figure out the formulation on that. So we do have some tools to include that, but for this one in particular, you just kind of want to add that number.
And we could add a row over here for I'm assuming they're asking about uh cancel. Nope, I don't want to do that. Adding in the nutrient value or if they're buying the manure, I don't know exactly. If you're buying the manure, you got to put the expense over on this side, but then you got to put the nutrient value in here someplace, so
Yeah,
that
and
becomes
we
part of
could
the
do
total.
that. That would be actually be one of those updates that we could do where I could
Yep.
actually take that formula and put it in a way that if you're looking at manure, way you can account it in there. Then yeah, it's part of that whole nutrient plan there. You can see how much you're getting benefit wise from the manure in addition to the cost.
Yep.
Yep, we can add that.
Okay. I think we're just past 8 o'clock. Are there any final questions or anything? If not, remember the next one will be 2 weeks from tonight with Angie Setzer talking about grain marketing. We hope all of you can attend that one. And I guess we have nothing else. Thanks for participating and have a good night.